Well, hey, all you wiretappers, good to be back here in studio Gangland Wire. I have a man today who has a career somewhat similar to mine. He was with the Rhode Island State Police Intelligence Unit, Anthony Pesare. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Love to talk about this stuff with you.
Yeah, this has got to be fun, guys. It's going to be fun. I always like having these ex-intelligence unit mob cops on here because we have so much in common. It's like, it's like we work together almost, but yet in different parts of the country. Now Anthony is writing some books right now. He's turned a lot of his old experiences into fictional books with a fictional detective, but it's all based on real events. We'll talk about those books a little bit more later on. Anthony, you were a college dean or a college professor, and you became a chief of police, and now you're writing novels. So tell the guys a little bit about your basic history.
Sure. I joined the state police when I was 22 years old, very young, obviously, like we all were. And I joined the state police, and I was lucky enough to be stationed in the intelligence unit, work with some excellent individuals. As you know, no one does anything alone in law enforcement. It's
Yeah.
always, you need the support of your fellow officers, prosecutors, and that sort of thing. So I was with the state police for 24 years because at the time they had a 25-year mandatory retirement. So you had to leave. So at 24, I was lucky enough to get a job as the assistant dean of the School of Justice Studies at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. I was there for 6 years. At the end of my sixth year, I was dean of the School of Justice Studies, which gave out undergraduate degrees in criminal justice, master's degree, and we also had a justice system training research institute where we brought a lot of officers for in-service training. But I was anxious to get back into law school. I loved the parents, I loved the students, the administration was good to me, but dealing with college professors is a whole different animal, and nothing against them, but that wasn't my culture. My
Yeah.
culture was our culture, and as you know, it's different. And a lot of it has to do with respect, and that I didn't feel that where I was working. So I was lucky enough, I applied and became a chief of police in Middletown, Rhode Island, which is just north of town, just north of Newport, Rhode Island, which is a tourist attraction. There's a Navy base here. And I served for chief for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
And I retired at the end of my 14th year. And I spent 4 years practicing law and actually prosecuting cases, misdemeanor cases for the town. At the end of that sixth year, the town came back to me and asked me if I would come back as chief, which is really unusual to happen, at least in Rhode Island. But the chief that was hired after me decided to move on, so I went back. And I did that for 2 years, and I just retired in December. And I mention all of that because it provided me with the materials for the books I wrote, but it also gave me the best experiences I could ever have. I mean, I grew up in a tenement house in Providence. We were probably poor, but we didn't know it.
Yeah.
But I say to officers all the time, you're in a unique position. You will be talking to captains of industry, rich people,
Yeah.
poor people. You're going to be exposed to something. I've met presidents, I've met senators, and what chance would I have other than being a member of law enforcement? So I grew up in an Italian neighborhood, so I took that, my upbringing, along with the fact that while I was on the state police, we had three witnesses in protective custody. And we were with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we made a lot of cases. And eventually, one of the cases, we convicted a made member of organized crime for first-degree murder, which is
Wow.
highly unusual, as you know, to get, but the witnesses help us put a case together. So when that case finished, I said, there's a story here. There's a story here. And I wasn't interested in doing true fiction and reading transcripts and doing all that hard research. I wasn't interested in it.
Yeah.
I fictionalized, my upbringing and these three people, but the framework is a real case. And so I did that and I published that, self-published it, and it did really well.
Yeah, that was your first book then. What was
Yeah,
the
my
title?
first book,
What was the title of that?
It's called They Always Win. They
Okay.
Always Win. And it's part of the Gino Peterson series. Like the book that you have is the second book. I'm working on the third book. It's going to be a three book series.
Okay.
And we'll close out Gino's chapter then. So I wrote that book, but then I got the Middletown job, and it was just so difficult to write. And so I put it off until before I retired. I put the second one together, and that was published in November of last year. As you know, your best writing, I think, comes from real experiences,
Yeah.
things that you've gone through. In my career, I was able to be on a task force with the FBI for 2 years, a money laundering case with wiretaps, buggings. It was just fascinating because, as you know, the feds have all the resources in the world
Oh
once
yeah.
they want to
Yeah.
decide something. So this was a multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme, and basically the gentleman was for like 1, 2, 3% of the total figures that he had to launder. He got back. He would take the cash at his business. It would come in 55-gallon drums.
Wow. Now,
Because he had a
was this part of the Patriarca family then, out of Providence? It was a made guy connected to that. What was his name?
so the person that ran the coin shop, it was called Saccoccia Coin, it was Stephen Saccoccia. He wasn't a made member or a mobster, but he was protected by the underboss of the family. I remember once we were listening to him and he called the underboss and he said, "Hey, so and so, another made guy keeps coming in here."
Mm-mm.
You know what it's like when they see somebody making a lot of money, could be anything, could be stealing cars, could be breaking
Yeah.
into houses. They want a piece of it.
Yeah.
And they're just very, they'll convince you that you need their protection. And they do offer that protection. So someone was trying to get into Steven's operation. And the underboss said to him, "I'll make a call. Don't worry about it." So they were associated with the crime family in that they were protected. I mean, were they kicking something upstairs to the boss? I have to imagine they did. But it was a fascinating operation. I've always said to myself, this gentleman was so talented. If he had put his efforts into running a business, he'd probably be running a Fortune 500 business. But
Yes.
instead, he wanted to do this.
Yeah. So now,
So,
how did that work? You mentioned they're bringing in barrels with money in it. I
yeah,
mean, he had a
so
coin shop. What was the techniques of how it worked,
sure,
step by
sure.
step?
So it was a precious metal coin place. And so what would happen is the cartel would ship to him 55-gallon drums, and they would be weighted with beads or something like that, and then filled with cash. And so what he would do is he would give $9,999 to what referred to as Smurfs.
Yeah.
These are people that work for him. They would go to the bank and exchange the cash for a money order or a bank check made out to Saccoccia Coin or whatever company he was using.
Oh,
He puts the checks in his account, sends that account overseas. It bounces like Britain, the islands, Caribbean islands, and then to Bogota.
okay.
And it was a continuous cycle.
Interesting. So this was a Colombian cartel that somehow made this connection with this guy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you ever figure out how they made that initial connection, or is that sometimes those things are, not important in the end anyhow, but I'm always
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I just imagine that someone maybe in the mob who had a connection
Yeah.
to the drug cartels. And so it
Because
wasn't
this Saccoccia was like an associate, if you will, of the Providence family, obviously, because he could make a call to the underboss. Remember what the underboss's name was?
I believe it was Nikki Bianco at the time.
Oh, Bianco. Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that name. Okay,
right.
so Bianco then protected him. He didn't do that for free.
No,
There's
no, they
no
never
doubt
do.
about that. They were
Yeah,
getting a piece of this money laundering
yeah, yep. Yeah.
thing, whatever it was.
And what was interesting too is that the cartels would call him, and sometimes he would have to outbid other money launderers.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like it wasn't he was just wasn't given the money of the job. So he'd say, okay, if they're going to do it for 7%, I'll do it for 6, or I'll do
Yeah,
it for 5, because he was doing such volume that he was going to make a ton of money.
yeah,
But yeah, he had to bid for that, whatever that, whether it was 2 million or a million, whatever they wanted laundered, he would have to bid by giving them a percentage that he would take off the top while it's, circling the globe before it goes
yeah,
back.
wow,
And he,
and so he had all these Smurfs lined up, and these were just other, these professional, semi-professional criminals that he knew from here. He was probably been buying stolen property from a lot of different people, stolen coin sets and burglary stuff, so he had a lot of those
absolutely.
criminal contacts. So
Yeah.
you guys, then did you start identifying these guys, who they were, and maybe follow them to watch them do these
Cash,
things
back.
with the
Yeah.
cash of
Yeah.
checks and
Yeah.
all that. Wow, that was a hell of an operation, wasn't it?
Oh, it was unbelievable. The feds were involved, IRS was
Yeah,
involved. Yeah, because the reason they got tipped off was that, so there's the reporting requirement,
yeah,
anything over $10,000. So they thought they were being smart by going in with just like a dollar under. But they kept going to the same banks over and over again. And one of the banks alerted the IRS saying, there's
yeah,
something wrong here. And
yeah.
so IRS, you know, they turned the case over to FBI. So we had FBI, we had state troopers, we had IRS agents, we had anybody you would want from the federal government.
Yeah.
And we worked it for 2 years, but it was
Wow,
incredible case, It was an incredible
really.
case.
Did you ever have to sit on any of those wiretaps and listen? My guys, when I worked as a sergeant, I came back in later as a sergeant. We would loan guys out to sit on those wiretaps. They hated it. They
I
hated it.
know.
There's nothing more boring than sitting on a wire all day long.
I know, I know. And then, I don't know if most people know, you have to minimize, which means
Yeah,
if you're listening to a conversation and it turns personal, you have to shut the machine off. And then, okay, when do I go back in to see if it went back to, it's just,
yeah,
it is boring. It is boring.
yeah, yeah. Interesting.
I
That
used to volunteer for Saturdays because I knew there wouldn't be much conversation. I would catch up on all my paperwork because
yeah.
Saturdays, there was not much. And we
Yeah,
say, "When do you
really.
want to work on Saturdays?" I said, "No, I can get a
I don't
lot
mind.
done." Uh,
But it was a lot more fun to go out and follow those Smurfs around and how they were working and all that. That would be a lot more fun.
yeah, it was. It was. The surveillances were really, you know, like you said, the fun part of it.
Yeah, that was a hell of a case. Now your intelligence unit, I always like to compare intelligence units. We course, we paid attention to the local mob, picked up their tag numbers, and just followed them
Mhm,
around to try to see what businesses they were frequenting, and maybe who their girlfriends were, and what bars they had a piece of the action in, and that kind of a thing. And,
mhm.
and on the other hand, we also had some guys that if there was, like, we had an operation on the Ku Klux Klan one time. And so, did you guys have those two operations going, or were you just strictly criminal in your intelligence unit?
Well, we did gather intelligence. If maybe if I explain this, it'll make more sense. So within the Rhode Island State Police, obviously we had the detective division,
Mm,
and Rhode Island has the state police have statewide jurisdiction,
yeah,
not like a lot of highway patrols out in West. So anyway, so we would have an auto theft squad, we would have a drug squad, and we would have this intelligence unit, which of all the detective divisions, so to speak, we were the only ones that weren't required to, our bosses were not required to report to the detective commander. We reported directly to the colonel.
same way here. The commander
Okay.
of the intelligence reports directly to the chief of police. Same way.
Yeah. So it was that kind of structure.
Yeah.
And so there was about 6 to 8 of us. We had a lieutenant who ran it. We had a sergeant, and then the rest were the worker bees.
Hmm.
And as you know, it's just long hours.
Yeah.
It's like following somebody, and next thing you know, you're in New York City.
Yeah.
'Cause it's
Yeah.
just the way it is.
Yeah.
And but it was the camaraderie amongst the detectives to work together. I mean, we were together more than we were with our families. Of course, we were young at that time, so this
Yeah.
was our lives.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I
But it
remember
was,
that.
yeah, quite an experience.
Now,
So
did you go into Federal Hill and tried running surveillances. I bet that was a booger of a place to run a surveillance, try to watch anybody or follow anybody or around
Yeah,
and in and out of.
it was difficult because it's one strip,
Yeah.
and they hang out on the corner, and they would wave to us, we'd wave to them, and occasionally we'd stop and talk to them. They were respectful, very respectful, I'd have to say. I never worried about getting hurt by the mob,
Yeah.
New England organized crime, because, as you know, we were the cost of doing business for them.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
caught
That's
them
right.
fair and square, right? If you
Yeah.
caught them fair and square, they understood. Yeah, but we would, and I recall like someone would come down from Maine who was connected, was probably paying Raymond, so we would follow him and try to get information on him, gather that intelligence, pass it
Yeah.
over to Maine. We did a lot of that. We did a lot of investigations. I recall doing one where Raymond Patriarca Sr. owned a place called Coinomatic
Hmm.
vending machines. So we got a tip that the cigarettes that he was putting in his machines, and of course, when he sent someone in to stop into your restaurant or store and say,
Yeah.
"We're going to put a machine here,"
Oh yeah.
you had a
Oh yeah.
machine. You had a
We
machine.
want that machine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So what was happening is there was one salesman of his that would drive down to North Carolina, South Carolina, buy a whole bunch of cigarettes,
Yeah.
come back to Rhode Island. They literally, Gary, they had a printing press that printed the Rhode Island State tax stamp. So it
Interesting.
might have been 17 cents, 18 cents a pack,
Yeah.
but it went in his pocket, not in
Yeah. In the
not in the
state's pocket.
pockets, right?
Yeah.
And so we arrested him, and of course we tried to get him to cooperate, and he said,
Yeah.
"Listen, no way. I'm gonna end up in the back of a trunk if I talk to you guys."
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's just like the kind of scams they will run. And
Yeah.
I think what's going on now is they've returned to these basics that have always made them money and have been under the radar. And I think
Yep.
that's why, I mean, they're devastated as far as Rhode Island is concerned with their
Yeah.
presence in the crime, but they're still making money. They're still out there.
Yeah. What we see here is that one thing is payday loan places and title loan places and buy here, pay here car dealerships because you can charge a huge amount of interest. And, and of course, I know a guy that's kind of a reformed mobster that did that, and he's
Mhm.
told me a little bit about it. And believe me, he did not, when he wanted to collect on a car loan, he did not use the regular rules of loan collection.
Uh, yes.
He liked to use like some
Yeah.
pepper spray and a nightclub.
Yeah. Yeah. Power of persuasion was not
Yeah.
anything you worried about, right?
Right, right. He did not follow the uniform
Commercial code.
commercial code on collection,
Oh, geez.
I practiced law for several years after I left the police
Good.
department,
Yeah.
and I sued a lot of these car dealers. And I asked one of my clients, it wasn't any names I'd ever heard of,
Hmm.
and I said, "What do you think about this car lot? What was your feel there?" He said, "Well, they feel like the mafia." But of course, once I got involved and filed a suit, there wasn't any more threats or intimidation or anything. And so yeah, I didn't really get onto that until later on. I became friendly with this guy who had done that and was a mob associate. He told me all the ins and outs. I thought,
Ins
well,
and
I'll be
outs. Yeah.
darned.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot more clients for me out there. I could sue these car dealers.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're afraid, they're more afraid of,
Oh, of
of
course.
them, especially to file a lawsuit against them. They were not going to do it.
Yeah.
Hardly anybody would. So anyhow, it's an interesting little crime story. Now in your books, tell us about some of the real life crimes and related to this book Back in the Game that you did. So can you tell a
Okay.
bit about what old Gino Peterson got into and some of the real life crimes and how you put them in the book? I think guys will really find that interesting because guys, I was going through this book and there's a lot of stuff that sounded real familiar to me, although
Mhm.
it was said in the context of this book. So tell us
Sure.
about that.
So, back in the game, the way the first book ends is that one of the protected witnesses, Richard Moon Diorio, is put in the witness protection program. Gino is trying to work his way back into detectives because he got tossed out in the first book. So now they're both trying to come back and regain the power. Moon decides he's in witness protection, and you know this, Gary. Guys hardly are able to do that. I mean, they put
Yeah,
them in a 9 to 5 job, working in
yeah.
a warehouse. They've never
They
done
can't
that
do
their
it.
whole
They
lives.
can't
They
do it.
can't
They
do it.
can't do it. No,
Can't
they
do it.
can't do it.
Yeah, so he decides to come back and try to get back in the mob. And Gino, who's trying to get back in the intelligence unit, back in detectives.
Yeah,
So along the way, we see Moon commit a lot of crimes, identity theft, anything he steals cars. He gets involved with a hooker, ends up beating up her pimp, setting him up for a crime. And Gino, at the same time, realizes I've got to make arrests to get noticed. So one of the things that is part of my experience is so Gino stops a car on the highway and it's typical of a trafficker. It's usually a lease car
yeah.
and it's not leased to them. It's from an out of state place. It's usually one operator. So it had earmarkings of drug trafficking. So at the time, we were able to do a consent to search, and I don't understand, but almost all of them would consent to the search
Hmm.
and sign. And so we found 3 kilos in the trunk of the car. So we arrested him. And so that became part of the story in the
Okay.
book. And then because, not every character, all characters need to have a flaw, even our heroes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
In this book, Gino has a flaw of he gets hooked on pain pills. And we talk about that struggle. And a couple of people have called me and they said, that was really brave of you to talk about your addiction. And I said, well,
It wasn't your addiction, it was
it
somebody
wasn't my
else's
addiction.
addiction.
So either I'm a really good writer or you don't get the point of fiction.
Yeah. Not to say that
Uh,
doesn't happen to cops. I worked with a guy once that I know he was, he
yeah.
ended up having to leave early under suspicious circumstances, but there's no doubt in my mind he had a bad back and he started in on those pain
Mhm.
pills and
Yeah.
and you could tell, man,
It's
he'd
a
be
vicious circle. Yeah.
angry as hell and then all of
Mm,
a sudden he'd leave and he'd come back and he'd be like a different guy.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought,
Because
that's interesting." Anyhow, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say your point's well taken because we come from a culture where you didn't say you had a problem. You
No.
didn't. It was suck it up, buddy. Suck it up
Yeah,
and move
yeah,
on.
yeah,
And so what did cops do? They self-medicated either
yeah,
with drink or pills or they got involved in gambling. And so we see, at least now, there's some shift towards understanding that officer
yeah,
wellness is important, you know?
yeah,
And I hope it changes, but there's cops have a lot of demons, and it's hard for
yeah.
some of them to rid themselves of the demons.
And it's still a really macho culture in which you do not admit any
Right.
kind of anomaly that might be construed as a weakness about yourself. I
Right.
understand that.
Yeah, when I at Middletown Police, like many other departments, we set up, you could call a place for counseling, and I never knew about it. We also found what was successful is peer counselors, so
Yeah,
offices that you could go to. But yeah, the mental health of police officers is really something that we need to pay attention to.
yeah, really.
Yeah.
All right, we digress a little bit now. Tell
I'm
is there any
sorry.
that's all right. It's interesting. I think it's interesting. And so is there any other crimes that you remember, kind of like that were in the news at one time, maybe that you incorporated into this?
Sure. In the first book, They Always Win, I talk about the killing of Richard Dickey Calley, who was a made member of organized crime. So what we learned from the three witnesses was that Bobo was an up and comer. He wasn't a made guy yet, and he had this crew, a small crew of 3 or 4 people. Frank Montalucci, a protective custody witness, Billy Furley, and Moon Diorio. And so they told us basically that there was always friction between Callie, the maid guy, and Marrapese, the associate who was on the cusp of being a maid guy. And so what brought it to a head was that Dickie Callie's brother came into Marrapese's social club on Federal Hill. Bobo treated him with disrespect because he wanted free drinks because his brother was a maid guy. But anyway, it gets back to Callie, and Callie decides he needs to talk to the underboss, Nicky Bianco, about Bobo. So they have a meeting, and according to the protected witnesses, Dickie Callie says, you need to put a chain on this guy. Pull him back like he's a bulldog. So whatever arrangements were made, they parted ways. A couple of weeks later, St. Patrick's Day in 1976, Callie walks into the social club like 2 o'clock in the morning, like into the lion's lair. Doesn't have any bodyguard or anything like that. And he's dressed in like St. Patrick's Day outfit, check green suit, green tie, green pants.
So, hey, this
Yeah,
isn't Whitey's Bulger's place. This is
yeah,
Raymond
I know, I
Patriarca's
know.
place. Come on.
I guess everybody's Irish on that day.
Yeah.
And so he goes into the bar, and Bobo's a little bit shocked. I mean, there's people in the bar, and Dickie Callie's there now, probably there to taunt him and say, "Here I am, I'm a tough guy, whatever."
Yeah.
So he sits at the bar, and Bobo sees this as his opportunity because, unbeknownst to the three witnesses, they found out later that he was given the permission to take out Dickie Callie
Yeah.
by the underboss or whoever. And so he says to Frank Montolucci, Bobo, go get the gun. So Montolucci goes out to a Cadillac that they use, pops the trunk, gets a 38, hands it, surreptitiously hands it to Bobo. And Bobo pours Dickie Callie a shot and puts it on the bar. And he said, this is a sign of respect. This is on the house. I hope that, bygones can be bygones. Dickie takes the drink. Bobo comes from around the bar, puts his hand on his shoulder, and shoots him 6 times in the back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he flops on the floor. And there were people there. There were some
That's
of
bold.
older county guys playing cards. There's Bobo. One of Bobo's cousins was passed out on a couch. They all scatter, obviously.
Yeah.
And so now Dickie Callie is lying on the ground. He's dead. Bobo says, bring the car around. They get Dickie's Cadillac, pop the trunk, and they throw him in the back of the trunk. And although he's dying or dead, Bobo comes out with a big butcher knife and stabs him like 7 times. He said, wait a minute. He's not leaving yet. And he just stabs the shit out of him. Then he has Montolucci and Billy Furley drive up to Rehoboth near an old golf course and bury him there. Now, normally they wouldn't find the body for years. There was a really sharp patrolman in Rehoboth who went on to be police chief. Dan Skelly, his name was. So he's patrolling. And the area where they dumped the body had been a place where stolen cars had been left.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people would, park there. And so Dan, driving back and forth, and snow's coming down. And one time when he passes, he sees tire marks. And he said, maybe it's a stolen car. I'm going to go check it out. He drives down maybe a quarter of a mile, doesn't see anything, decides to turn around with the cruiser, but the cruiser gets stuck. He's like trying to make a U-turn, a 360 turn, and he gets stuck. So he pops the trunk because he's going to get something to try to get the tires moving. And he sees a trickle of blood in the snow.
Mm.
And so, being the shop guy that he is, he calls it in and he follows the trail. And then there's snow covered ground, but then there's an indentation of the snow.
It
Yeah,
sunk a little.
he sunk down, right. So Dan gets his, like a tire iron, hits it, and it goes right down. So he calls out the troops and they dig up Dickie Callie's body. But from 1976 to probably 83, nobody came forward. They
Yeah.
couldn't solve it. And what happens is Mundi Oreo is sitting in prison in Walpole for a crime he didn't commit. He was accused of beating up a labor union official in Fall River at Bobo's behest, him and Frank Martelluzzi. Well, Moon didn't go. It was actually another guy, Albie Focarelli, who went with him to beat this guy up. Martelluzzi, being the Einstein that he was, he drove his own car up there. Someone got the plate. They're going to pinch him, and Providence police say, well, who does he hang around with? Who's his main guy? Diorio. So they picked them both up. The union guy supposedly identifies both of them. And now they're going on trial, and they're able to do a plea bargain if they want. Now, Moon's in his 50s, and he was willing to do like 4 or 5 years on a plea. But Martelluzzi insisted they go to trial, that the lawyers could beat it. And Bobo said, that's what you're going to do, because he's got to do it. So they go through the trial. They're both found guilty, and he gets like a 15 to 20-year sentence. So he sits in his cell for 2 years saying, I'm going to die here. I'm going to die here. So he calls the state police and says, I have information about the Dickie Cali murder, but you got to get me out of prison. So that's when he got out of prison. That's when we started the investigation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So now that's all real, and you put that all fictionalized into your book. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
See, guys, this book is going to suck you in just like I was for that entire story. So this book is, when you base these, you have to fictionalize things sometimes to make it work, because real life is not as clean as you could then make it work and make it flow a lot smoother and fill in some things that you don't really know and nobody will ever know in order to make it make more sense. Otherwise, many times it's hard to make sense out of some of these mob stories because there's so much you'll never know. Nobody will ever know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, that's a great story, man. You had me pulled in, Anthony.
Oh,
You
I think
had me
the
pulled in.
most amazing thing is Moon Diorio was so smart that he had learned. He wasn't a part of the murder. He wasn't even
Yeah,
there, but he learned so much from them talking about it that he was able to sort of fool us
yeah,
into thinking that he was there, and we could. So it was only until we put pressure on the other two, and they said he wasn't there. It was me, and so we got the rest of the case. And so he got himself out of jail
yeah,
by
yeah,
taking the facts. And I remember one interesting thing is, so right after the murder, it's a couple of weeks, and they're in the social club, and Bobo says to them, "From now on, you have to treat me differently." And they said, "What do you mean?" "Well, when we go out, like go to a restaurant or something, there's no more ass grabbing. You can't punch me in the arm
yeah,
or
yeah,
swear at me."
yeah,
And so they figured, okay, he's a made guy now, so we have to treat him
yeah.
differently.
It's kind of like getting promoted to captain on the police department.
Yeah, but when you're captain, nobody listens to you. When you're the
Yeah, but
brow,
but
when
but
you're,
but you don't call them by your little pet names and joke around with them and punch them in the arm.
yeah.
Anyhow, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just
No,
popped
no,
in
that,
my head.
yeah, no, it was kind of an ingenious move, to get him
Yeah,
out under. And that's why the second book dovetails into him. All right, they can't use him as a witness because he lied to them. So they bring him
yeah,
to grand jury. He does his mea culpa, and then they put him in the witness protection. Second book, he's in witness protection. He's in Falls Church, Virginia. And this is another true story. So he's leaving his apartment after working overnight, and goes to this coffee shop every day. Goes to the coffee shop. He sees this young kid, probably 9, 10 years old, talk to his dad, and then head to the men's room. Then he sees this creepy guy follow him into the men's room. So he said, this is not right. Something's going on.
yeah,
So he goes into the men's room and he hears a little kid say, no, no, I can do this myself. And the guy say, no, let me just help you, and I'll hold it so you don't spray it all. And so Moon literally grabs him, tells the kid to screw, and he beats the shit out of him and he sticks his head in the toilet and keeps flushing it and flushing it and flushing. And then he walks out and the manager's like running because of the commotion. And the manager says, is everything all right? He goes, no, no, there's some shit you need to clean up in the bathroom. And he walks away. So that to me was Moon demonstrating that he had the violence within him
Yeah.
to get back into the mob. And it's kind of like a heroic thing what he did, but the point I was trying to make was here's a guy that is struggling. He can't do the job on night watchman in Virginia. He's trying to make up his mind like 70-30. I'll go back and try to get back in because that could be a death sentence.
Yeah.
And I talk about a lot about that in the second book, him trying to get back with the new boss. But it demonstrates to me that most of these people are psychopath. And Bobo Marrapese was kind of like that, where he would all of a sudden he would just snap.
Yeah.
And they said they could see it in his eyes. So he was the kind of guy that could kill someone, bury him, and this happened, and then go into a restaurant and have veal and peas like it was nothing.
That's mob guys. I mean, everyone I've met, with rare exception, have just been charming as hell. But yeah, what they're capable of. On the other
Yeah.
hand, the Henry Hill talks about in Goodfellas, that famous scene where they kill this guy, they put him in the trunk, and then they stop off at Joe Pesci's house and have spaghetti with his mom, and then go back in, and then the guy's beating on the trunk, and they like stab the shit out of him. I mean, it's you're telling the same stories. I mean, because these guys are out of the same mold.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Oh, that's a great scene where they're looking at the painting and
yeah.
Pesci goes, look at that. One dog's looking one way, one dog's looking another way, and the
Yeah.
guy's just fishing. Oh man.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
anyhow. All right.
Mhm.
Anthony Pesare, this has been great. This is a couple of really great books. I'll have links to his author's page, and so you can go find these books at Amazon. I really appreciate you coming on the show, Anthony. This has been fun. And if I get back to Rhode Island one of these days, I've got relatives in Boston. I get some
Oh,
extra time. I'm going to give you a call and we'll go
oh,
have
please
lunch or
do.
coffee or something.
Love to show
Well,
you.
I've gotten to know a guy on Block Island too. That he's kind of erstwhile screenwriter. I met him through a friend of mine here in Kansas City, and
Yeah.
and I went to Block Island once and met him. I just was back visiting my
Mhm.
in-laws, and he's going to write a screenplay for me. He's never really sold one, but he's written a bunch of them. So we'll see how that works. About
We'll go out and put the muscle on. We'll put a little heat on.
Yeah. And there's a lot of I've done these mob tours all around the country, and I used to do them on my motorcycle. Now I'll be doing them in a car. Gotten too old to do that, but I wouldn't mind maybe hitting some spots there in Rhode Island, and just take my camera and my telephone and use a camera and a mic and just talk about what was going on. This is where Raymond Patriarca's place was. Maybe we could do something like that too.
We can show you all of that. They actually do have a mob tour that
Oh,
stops at
do they?
yeah, and of course, because it's an Italian neighborhood, they stop at about 8 restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
Get an appetizer. Then they go to the next crime scene.
Yeah.
Then you go to Raymond's old business.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
love to host you, and I
Yeah.
hope we get
That
a
would.
chance. Hope we get a
Okay.
chance to do this again.
All right. Great. All right. Anthony, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you, Gary. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, guys, that was a lot of fun. I really like Anthony. I do want to get back there to Rhode Island and do that mob tour of Federal Hill and have coffee or have some Italian food with him. It sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. We have such similar backgrounds. There's a lot more similarities of our backgrounds we can go into in that intelligence business. There's a lot of stuff you don't really want to talk about on the air, and it wasn't really germane to what we were doing. So anyhow, don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles. Although I tell you guys, I'm getting old. I'm not taking any more motorcycle trips, and I'm gonna put them up for sale. Yeah, but I do like motorcycles. I'll always like motorcycles. If you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, be sure and go to the VA website. They've got a hotline number and drugs or alcohol. Anthony Ruggiano has a hotline number and on his website, reformedgangsters.com, I think, and he has a YouTube page. He's doing a lot of stuff right now, so I'm sure you can figure out. He's an alcohol counselor, drug and alcohol counselor down in Florida. Boy, if you need treatment, why, that would be cool. Go down to Florida and have him as your treatment guy. If you have a problem with gambling, go to Missouri, 1-800-BETS-OFF. Other states, every state that has gambling will have some kind of a hotline or website or something where you can find some help for your gambling. As I've said before, these gambling addicts, those are guys that the mob just victimizes the shit out of. And Anthony and I talked about that a little bit. Bust out your business or beat you up or whatever, threaten your family. There's just, no good. It's not a good deal. If you can't control that gambling, why, you better figure out something else to do. Because anytime you're in sports gambling, particularly, the mob is somehow connected to it. Not directly, maybe not with your straight bookie, but somehow they're connected to it. Now, I got stuff for sale. I'll have a link to Anthony's author page. I'll have a link to my author page. Got several books. I'm working on a book now that I'm going to kind of fictionalize, but based on the Savella-Spiro Wars of the 1970s, which I was right in the middle of. So I'll use a lot of my experiences, but I will make up some names and probably use some fiction to gloss over to connect some sequences and make a little more sense. I think that's all I got to sell. Be sure and like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and subscribe if you're on the Apple app or the podcast app. Give me a review. And one last thing, I mentioned this before. I don't have many reviews on my New York book on Amazon. So if you've read that thing, particularly, I like it where it says verified purchaser, or at least read some pages on your Kindle app. Why, go in there and give me a review. I like to get some more reviews on there. So that's all the asking I've got to do, and help support the podcast. I really appreciate all you guys just by listening each week. That's just support enough. Thanks a lot, guys. 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 Support enough. Thanks a lot, guys.